Come and take me out of the dark. Just shed a little light, shed a little light on me. And open up my eyes, just so that I can see.
I am a finance professional. I am well versed in things financial and economic. But a lot of people forget that economics, okay, and finance from a scientific perspective is a social science. Being a social science, it's about people. It's about behaviors. It's about experiences. It's not just about the measurement of value of money, but it's about the people's experience. So from that social science perspective, I want to hear your story. I want to hear the social part of the science. So put your thoughts down on postcards, send them to me, and let's get the word out.
Come and take me out of the dark.
My business collapsed in 2010. I have struggled with so many things since then. One week I ran out of money for food. I would wake every night at 3 o'clock in the morning and go to the end of my garden and phone my mother's mobile, arguing, asking her to help me. My mother died in 2007.
This is sort of the way you work, that you sort of compare balance sheets with reality?
Yes, that's what I do. Not just balance sheet. I compare reality with the economic reality with the reality that's reported on paper through companies and through the media, etc. When there's a discrepancy, I attempt to take advantage of the discrepancy. And that's the discrepancy on the upside or the downside. I'm not very emotional. I dislike it when I listen to the financial media and I hear terms such as you're pessimistic or you're optimistic. If you're pessimistic or optimistic, you'll probably end up being broke very soon. The key is to be realistic.
Come and take me out of the dark.
Greetings. My name is Reggie Middleton. I'm a financial analyst and entrepreneurial investor based in New York City. I'm known for telling the truth. That's my claim to fame, basically. We have other financial pundits and personalities, and they're known for specializing in certain asset classes or styles or investment styles. And I'm known for being honest, extremely honest, objectively or offensively honest, shall I say.
Come and take me out of the dark.
I mean, not to be impolite, but what makes you so special that they all want to read your blog?
I don't know if special is a word to use. I am very objective and I don't have inherent conflicts of interest because I don't have clients that I deal with as a principal or an agent. I can step on toes and be objective and offensively honest.
Come and take me out of the dark.
I want to hear your story. Tell me a story. Tell me a narrative. Let's forget about finance, bonds, stocks, banks, lending institutions. Tell me your narrative about what has happened, about what you've been through. Let's hear a story. Let's have your story spread throughout the world. I live in fear now, being judged by others for honestly trying to run a business. I'm locked into debt, knowing the only money I can offer my wife now is a widow's pension. To Reggie Middleton, Parliament House, Dunbar Street, Georgia Square. Stop. The European banking system is bigger than Europe in and of itself. With the use of leverage, a lot of European banks have been allowed to amass assets that are close to or equal to the size of the actual sovereign state that they're domiciled in. You have a country with a $1 trillion GDP, and they're housing 4 banks, and each of those banks have $600 billion in assets, or $800 trillion in assets. That company's GDP is outstripped by its banking asset base by 4 times. So if one of those banks run into trouble, and their leverage, say, 60 or 70 or even 30 to 1, because they only have, say, 20 or 30 billion dollars of equity, they can't be saved by the country. And the problem is, not only can the country not save that one particular bank, but the banks are so interrelated that they are, it's like a domino effect. So if one bank falls, it won't be able to pay its obligations to the second bank, which is its counterparty. If that second bank then has a problem, and then that third bank, and then the fourth and the fifth, so a domino effect. So the problem gets worse.
Come and take me out of the dark.
Offensively objective. And what I've been doing as of late was focusing my hardcore analytical style, my extreme truth, so to say, on the country environment, primarily its banking system. So we are not privy to what is being said in the boardrooms of the banks throughout Ireland. Despite the fact that I'm not a fly on the wall and I can't hear what's going on directly, I can ferret out much of what happened through my financial analysis. But those who are able to control and manipulate the media, or even have a direct pipe to the media, have a much stronger, much louder voice than the common everyday man. As I aggregate the forces of the common everyday man, I get to tell their story. So those in the boardrooms and those in the oligarchy have had their say. Now it's time for you to have your say. Let's gather your stories. Let's strengthen your stories with hard fact. And let's have the Irish man, the common Irish man and the common Irish woman, the Irish family, have their say in their day in the light. Now, a lot of you who live in Ireland or who deal with the Irish banking system are probably wondering, what is the difference between the Irish banks, the Irish banking system, and the rest of the EU? There is some sort of aura of recovery that's going through the EU, where those that are in charge or those that have the ability to disseminate information through the mass media are somehow making it seem like we've hit the bottom and we're on our way up. But I think many of you in Ireland feel that that is not the case. Well, my job right now, my goal, is to take actual hard analysis and put it behind your gut feeling, your observations, what you see, feel, hear, breathe, and smell day in and day out. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear what you're going through. I want to hear what you see things are from your perspective personally, your family, your business, your friends, your environment. And when you see something that somehow doesn't smell right, feel right, taste right, you can now put an actual analysis behind it. I can go very, very high end. I've called in the US the fall of the major banks during the beginning of the credit crisis, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, Washington Mutual, Countrywide. I've called the entire European debt debacle way in advance. This is not to say that I am some brilliant scientist. I'm not. I'm a realist. I'm a simple mathematician. 1 + 1 must equal 2. Okay, and if it equals anything else, that doesn't mean that the rules of math have changed. That means that there's a problem. I've decided, or I've found that there's a problem in Ireland. I will provide the analysis that backs the feelings of this problem. I need for you to provide the grassroots, right? The actual human portion of this. Together, right, we'll make a book, we'll make videos, we'll make the media necessary to basically blow the lid off of what could quite possibly be one of the biggest cover-ups in Europe. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, Reggie, you're out with an explosive new report talking about the financial ground zero, as you call it, the fraud at the highest levels of AIB in Ireland. Talk about it.
Well, I was always skeptical of the Irish banks. Their problems are very similar to the problems we have in other EU and U.S. Banks, where basically they gave a lot of loans, didn't underwrite them very carefully or accurately against overpriced or overvalued collateral. That collateral reduced in value, okay, but the loan stayed. And basically, when you have assets that drop and debt that remains the same, it's equity that's eaten away. And that's the problem with these banks as well as the other banks. Okay. Now,
All right, Reggie, let me jump in and ask you this. In other words, if I'm understanding you correctly, the Irish banking system, we were told, was bailed out. 100% of the bond holders were made whole. The state took on 100% of all the liability. The Troika points to Ireland as the poster child of everything that can go right with their prescriptions. Are you telling me that the Irish banking system is about to get another huge bailout and collapse?
Well, I have no idea if they're going to get a bailout, but you know, the collapse looks like it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, you know, it looks like there may be some prestidigitation, you know, some Harry Potter style magic, but the problem is there. Okay, now I went over the initial problem, and of course they were bailed out once, possibly again, and then they had a troika injection because the government possibly didn't have enough money to bail them out another time. But after going through the papers and going through the records that were filed, and both with regulatory bodies in Ireland, in America with the SEC, and the actual paperwork charges that were given to the offices in Ireland, you see a lot of discrepancies. One very big discrepancy was the actual charge. A charge is very similar to a mortgage in the U.S., where they give an asset in exchange for financing, and they pledge the collateral to the person that they got the loan from, or the entity that they got the loan from. The actual paper that was filed with the Irish office says that each and every security, eligible security, is covered under this charge. Now, in their annual report, it states that certain securities were covered under the charge. Now, it's a very minor difference from a nomenclature perspective, but from a meaning perspective, it's an awful lot. Now, it appears that a lot of lay people are having a problem understanding the difference. So I'm going to give a very visual understanding. Here we have American notes, right? It's a bunch of money. Okay. Now you have a person who says they have a claim on certain of these notes. And then you have another person who says I have a claim on each and every one of these notes. Now, which one of these would be the more valuable claim? Certain of these notes or each and every?
Right, absolutely.
And this is basically the issue with AIB. And the AIB is saying to the public that there's a claim on certain, but the actual document that they filed said there's a claim on each of the notes.
Right, so as we've seen throughout this
Now,
entire...
put that way, hopefully it's easy to understand.
As we've seen throughout this entire crisis, you always come back to a question of the value of the collateral. The collateral that people are using to buttress all of these refinancing schemes and bailout schemes itself is not worth the paper that it's not printed on. So here you have AIB about to crash again. Now, the Irish taxpayer owns AIB. So is the Irish population about to get Cyprus? In other words, is there going to be a bail-in now in Ireland where they're going to ask depositors to contribute? They're just going to take money from depositors. This is a new trend. We saw it with MF Global. We saw it in Cyprus. Are we going to see it now in Ireland, Reggie?
That depends on if the Troika is willing, the Troika and Germany et al. Are truly willing to foot the bill for the full bailout. You call it a bail-in, but it's basically a bailout. To discuss what happened in Cyprus and what very well may happen in Ireland, you have several levels of capital structure in a bank. You have depositors on the bottom, and depositors, most depositors think of themselves as investors. They think of themselves as someone who avail themselves of a bank's services for a very, very low risk storage of their capital. Okay, and then you have higher on the hierarchy, you have junior and senior bondholders, okay, who assume risk voluntarily in exchange for a materially higher return than the depositors. And then above them, you have the equity stakeholders who assume even more risk for presumably a higher return. Okay, now, I believe you should wipe out all investors who assume risk, if a bank goes bust, because that's basically what you are getting in return for, the risk of it going bust or the potential for it doing well. Depositors are a slightly different story. Now, you do assume risk when you put your money in the bank, okay, but you assume a very low modicum of risk, okay? If you wipe out depositors, you basically destroy the banking system, because the banks basically are made up of depositors. That is the largest funding base, that is the most liquid funding base, and it should be the scarcest funding base. But for some reason, I think a lot of the mindset in Ireland is we have no choice but to put our money in banks. If there's even the slightest chance of you losing any principal at all, okay, is it worth 0.07% return on your money, or 1%, or 1.2%, or 3%? Ask the people in Cyprus who are getting 4, 4.5, 5, 6%, if it was worth losing 60% of their capital.
Right. I mean, in Ireland, it is an interesting situation because, of course, the banks are backstopped now by the Troika, which includes the IMF, the ECB, and the EU. And what you're saying and what now people understand is that, for example, the IMF is in self-bankrupt. The EU is bankrupt. The ECB, European Central Bank, is insolvent. It's bankrupt. So people need to understand that these banks that they're putting their money in are backed by banks that are in turn bankrupt. The Bank of International Settlements, which collateralizes all these central banks, is insolvent. So that's something people need to wrap their minds around. Of course, the governments and the state-owned media outlets like RTE in Ireland have failed to carry that message and tell the truth to the population, so they're culpable in an act of financial terrorism. That's without doubt. But the people in Ireland feel as though it's their moral obligation to help bail out these banks. Is that true?
Well, we'll find out, because I don't believe, especially if Cyprus is a template, I don't believe that the ECB and the IMF are going to bail out the banks. I believe that the guys with their checking and savings accounts are going to bail out the banks, if Cyprus is a template. And I truly do believe that it's either Cyprus is a template, or you're going to have a lot of political ramifications when Germany is asked to foot a bill, as well as the rest of the EC, the EU, the IMF, etc. This can't go on for long. I have a whole list of banks. I listed Anglo-Irish, I listed Allied Irish, but I have a whole list of banks to reveal. And each and every one of them have played significant games or bust from a purely fundamental perspective. And, the way I see it, and I could be wrong, of course, I have been wrong in 1999 once, so it is possible. But the way I see it, each and every one of these are going to need a bailout if you look at them from a fundamental perspective.
Okay, so just to recap, your call is that Irish banks that have already crashed and needed a bailout are in a position now, as we've said on this show now for several years, and as I told people in Ireland myself personally, these banks are going to crash again and require yet another huge response, which could be like Cyprus, where they just take the money directly out of your account. Now, I wanted to ask you about the connection between the Troika as part of the bailout. They didn't want to avoid a credit event that would trigger the credit default swap mechanism from coming into play. So how much pressure did the U.S. and the American bankers apply to the IMF to hide the fact when they went through the initial crash that this was all about preserving wealth on Wall Street and had absolutely nothing to do with the people in Ireland?
If I was a fly on the wall, I would assume that fly would have heard that the U.S. was basically calling the shots. You know, if you take a look at the association that determines credit events, okay, that association is made up of, or that panel is made up of, some of the biggest CDS writers, you know, in the world. So that's like going to a fox and asking him his opinion of whether chicken should be served for dinner.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you. Let me expand on that a little bit. What kind of blowback are we going to see in the U.S., if any, and what banks might be involved?
That's interesting because if you can prove misrepresentation, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm definitely not a lawyer at all. So don't take it as legal advice. But as a layperson, as common sense perspective, if you could prove misrepresentation, do CDS get paid off, or is this a different venue? In addition, several banks are proven to be significantly undercapitalized or materially over encumbered. Okay, what happens then? Even if CDS are written off, there's not enough capital in the system, not enough equity in the system to pay it off. You know, if I'm not mistaken, when I was on your show before, my opinion of the CDS is we have 5 people in a room, okay? One of them had some money, and everybody else was borrowing money from them in a circle, okay? And they were insuring this person. They're insuring their partners. I insure B, B insures C, C insures D, D insures E, and then E comes back and insures me. If one of us take a significant loss, you just have dominoes fall.
Right.
Okay, and it's just not enough capital, not enough money to pay for it.
Let me move on to post-Cyprus. What about Spain, Italy, France? What are the signs that the savings in these countries are about to be stolen by the Troika and these other clowns?
I will get to them, through the site, and it's actually a lot of work, it's a lot of time. There's that many banks that are in trouble. But I can tell you this much. The money, if you consider it to be stolen, will probably be stolen by those who ran the banks into the ground and then expect to be recapitalized versus driven out of business. Okay? Now, there is a sense where you could say it's justified that those who put their money in the banks will lose their money if they put their money in the bad bank. But then you have to re-examine the entire system and what a bank is. Okay? Is the common depositor, is the common grandmother who puts their money into a certificate deposit or demand deposit or savings account, is she expected to be a credit analyst? Problem is, interest rates are too low. Okay, you put your money into a bank, you're getting, in the U.S., you're getting 0.7% return, maybe 1% return. Okay, if there's any risk there, rates have to be much higher. There's no way in the world to avoid higher rates when people realize that there's significant risk in their banks. Even a small modicum of risk, rates have to go up. There are just not enough fools to go around to give a risky investment to somebody, or to take a risky investment, to give somebody a risky investment and give them a return of 0.7%. It's just not enough fools to go around. It may be a lot, but not enough to support a global banking system.
Come and take me out of the dark.
I've been contacted by so many through Twitter, through Facebook, through the social media, by people who've asked me to tell them more, to do more analysis, to shed more light on the financial situation in Ireland. Okay, so that's what I've decided to do. I mean, this theme song in the background, Shed a Little Light, is not only an interesting song, but it's indicative of what it is this project is about. Okay, I plan to shed light on the darker corners of what is happening in the Irish banking system. Not just the revelations with Anglo-Irish, but soon to be revelations, and many, many other things. Yeah, at least 5 or 6 other institutions. So help me shed light.
Take me out of the dark. Just shed a little light. Shed a little light on me. And open up my eyes just so that I can see.
So on that note, I look forward to coming to the beautiful country of Ireland and speaking to you and telling these stories firsthand in person. I know that the Irish here in the U.S. are truly saddened by what's going on in Ireland, truly saddened and disappointed. I think together we can actually do something about it. And I look forward to it, honestly. Cheers.